March 2022. A Russian mechanized column rolls down a Ukrainian boulevard. Tanks, armored personnel carriers, supply trucks, over a dozen vehicles carrying troops toward Kyiv. They don't see the ambush coming. Hidden in the tree line, Ukrainian soldiers wait, fingers on triggers, British-supplied anti-tank missiles aimed. Discipline holding them back as the first vehicles pass. Then, fire. 2 missiles streak toward the column. One hits a Russian tank. The turret explodes. Decapitated, the tank rolls forward like a headless corpse before stopping. Chaos erupts. Russian vehicles scatter. Soldiers jump from carriers and run. Some toward the ambush. They're cut down by small arms fire. Others flee the opposite direction. More missiles fire. More hits. More Russian vehicles burning. Within minutes, 3 vehicles destroyed, 8 Russian soldiers down, the convoy shattered. This was one ambush, one engagement, one demonstration of how British-supplied weapons changed the war in Ukraine. And it happened over and over, hundreds of times, thousands of Russian vehicles destroyed, British weapons in Ukrainian hands proving devastatingly effective. This is the story of how Britain armed Ukraine, what weapons were supplied, how Ukrainians used them in combat, and why they were so effective against Russian forces. Let's start with what Britain actually supplied to Ukraine. Over 12,000 anti-tank weapons delivered since February 2022. That's not just missiles, it's a complete anti-armor arsenal. The centerpiece, NLAW, Next Generation Light Anti-Tank Weapon. By May 2022, the UK had supplied Ukraine with 5,361 NLAW portable anti-tank guided missiles. By 2023, that number reached over 5,000 NLAWs. NLAW is a shoulder-fired, fire-and-forget anti-tank system. 1 shot per launcher, disposable, but absolutely devastating. The weapon weighs just 12.5 kilograms, light enough for infantry to carry and deploy quickly. Range, 20 to 800 meters, perfect for ambush operations in urban or forested terrain. 2 firing modes, direct attack for lighter armored vehicles and overfly top attack for heavily armored tanks. In top attack mode, the missile flies above the tank and detonates downward, hitting the weakest armor on top of the turret. Russian tanks are designed to resist frontal attacks. Top armor, much thinner. NLAW exploits that vulnerability. The guidance system uses predictive line-of-sight technology. The operator briefly tracks the target, the system calculates trajectory, then the operator fires. No need to maintain lock. Fire and forget. The soldier can immediately take cover. This is critical in combat. Older anti-tank systems require the operator to guide the missile all the way to impact, exposing them to enemy fire. NLAW doesn't. Fire, move, survive. Alongside NLAW, Britain supplied Javelin missiles. Over 200 American-made Javelin anti-tank guided missiles by May 2022. Javelin is even more sophisticated. Thermal imaging guidance, longer range, up to 2.5 kilometers, top attack trajectory as well, but heavier and more expensive. Both weapons are deadly, but NLAW became the workhorse, lighter, easier to deploy, perfect for the kind of ambush warfare Ukrainians excelled at. Then there's Brimstone. Originally an air-launched missile designed to destroy tanks from aircraft, but Ukraine doesn't have compatible aircraft, so Britain helped Ukraine adapt Brimstone for ground launch. Mobile launchers with improvised frames mounting aircraft launchers. Brimstone uses millimetric wave radar guidance, fire and forget. Multiple missiles can be launched simultaneously against different targets. It's a tank-killing machine. Over 12,000 anti-tank weapons total, including NLAW, Javelin, and Brimstone systems. But the arsenal extended beyond anti-tank missiles. Starstreak high-velocity missiles, 6 Stormer vehicles fitted with Starstreak launchers, plus hundreds of additional missiles. Starstreak travels at over Mach 3, making it nearly impossible to evade. Ukrainian forces have used it to shoot down Russian helicopters and aircraft. 14 Challenger 2 main battle tanks with thousands of rounds of ammunition. These weren't just defensive weapons. Ukrainian crews used them offensively, leveraging the Challenger 2's superior range and accuracy. 32 AS-90 self-propelled 155mm howitzers, mobile artillery providing long-range fire support. Multiple launch rocket systems, precision-guided rockets striking targets 70+ kilometers away. Hundreds of armored and protected vehicles, everything from mastiff mine-resistant vehicles to Saxon armored personnel carriers. Over 400,000 rounds of artillery shells. Ammunition is the lifeblood of artillery warfare, and Britain supplied it in massive quantities. And perhaps most importantly, training. Operation Interflex trained over 51,000 Ukrainian troops by 2024, with numbers reaching over 58,000 by late 2025. Ukrainian soldiers learned British tactics, British weapons handling, British battlefield discipline. That training translated directly into combat effectiveness. This wasn't just equipment donation, it was comprehensive military support designed to maximize Ukrainian capabilities. Let's go back to February and March 2022, the opening weeks of the war. Russian forces invaded from multiple directions: Belarus toward Kyiv, the east toward Kharkiv and Donbass, and the south from Crimea. The famous 40-mile Russian convoy formed north of Kyiv. Thousands of vehicles, tanks, artillery, supply trucks. A massive armored column intended to overwhelm Ukrainian defenses and capture the capital. It stalled. Logistics problems, Ukrainian resistance, lack of air superiority. But what really devastated that convoy? Ambushes. Ukrainian forces, armed with British NLAWs and other anti-tank weapons, positioned themselves along the convoy's route, hidden in forests, concealed in buildings, waiting. In March 2022, a Ukrainian reconnaissance element ambushed a Russian mechanized column using hunter-killer team tactics. Here's how it worked. Reconnaissance elements identified the convoy's route. They likely tracked Russian movements for days, noting patterns, same roads, same times, predictable behavior. Ambush teams positioned themselves in concealed locations with clear lines of fire. They exercised disciplined target discrimination, letting less valuable vehicles pass while focusing on high-value targets. When the moment came, they fired. Video footage shows Ukrainian forces hidden behind a tree line, allowing several Russian vehicles to pass before two anti-tank rockets fire, one likely a British NLAW. The first hit decapitates a tank, turret blown off. The tank continues rolling headless down the road before stopping. Two soldiers jump out. One runs toward the ambush and is cut down by small arms fire. The other flees. Immediately, the convoy panics. Vehicles disperse. Most turn and flee to the opposite side of the road. An armored personnel carrier stops behind the damaged tank. 6 soldiers riding on its roof jump or fall off. One is immediately immobile. The ambush site is close, maybe 50 meters. That takes nerves of steel. Russian tankers could see the tree line, but they can't see individual soldiers hidden in vegetation. 2 Russian tanks finally react correctly. They turn to face the ambush and begin firing high-explosive rounds into the tree line. Suppressive fire, standard counter-ambush tactics. At one point, a Russian tank fires a round that explodes just 10 meters from a Ukrainian position. Split seconds later, despite being deafened and nearly hit, the Ukrainian soldier fires back with supernatural steady hands and hits. That's training, that's discipline, that's British-trained Ukrainian soldiers refusing to panic under fire. End result, 3 vehicles destroyed, 8 Russians down on the road. The convoy retreats. This pattern repeated across northern Ukraine. Small Ukrainian teams armed with NLAWs and javelins devastated Russian columns. The Russians made tactical errors. They bunched vehicles together, making them easier targets for indirect fire. They used predictable routes. They lacked infantry screening to detect ambushes. They didn't suppress ambush sites aggressively enough. Ukrainian forces exploited every mistake. Why were British weapons so effective? First, capability. NLAW could destroy any Russian tank. T-72, T-80, T-90 didn't matter. Top attack mode targeted weak spots. Russian armor couldn't protect against it. Second, portability. Infantry teams could move quickly, set up ambushes, fire, and relocate before Russian forces could respond. Heavier anti-tank systems would have been too slow. Third, ease of use. NLAW's fire and forget guidance meant operators didn't need extensive training. Ukrainian troops could become proficient quickly, and they did, thanks to British training programs. Fourth, numbers. Thousands of NLAWs meant Ukrainian forces had enough weapons to sustain operations. They weren't rationing missiles. They could fire whenever targets presented themselves. The result? Russian offensive toward Kyiv stalled. The 40-mile convoy became a symbol of failure. Russian forces withdrew from northern Ukraine entirely by early April 2022. British weapons played a significant role in that strategic victory. Ukrainian forces didn't just use British weapons, they adapted British tactics. Hunter-killer teams, small, highly mobile units designed to find and destroy enemy armor. Ukrainian ambushes using hunter-killer team tactics demonstrated success in large-scale combat operations against a technologically superior force. Here's the concept. A hunter-killer team consists of two elements, the hunter and the killer. The hunter is a reconnaissance element, drones, scouts, observation posts. Their job is to find targets, track movements, and communicate locations to the killer element. The killer is the strike team, anti-tank missile operators, artillery spotters, or direct fire assets like tanks. They maneuver into position, engage the target, and withdraw before the enemy can respond. It's decentralized warfare, small teams operating semi-autonomously within a larger operational framework. For Ukraine, this was ideal. They couldn't match Russian numbers in tanks or artillery, but they could field dozens of hunter-killer teams across the front, each capable of devastating effect. British weapons fit perfectly into this doctrine. NLAW and Javelin provided the killing power, light enough for infantry to carry, deadly enough to destroy any target, simple enough to deploy quickly. Ukrainian training emphasized discipline and patience. Let convoys pass, wait for high-value targets, coordinate with other teams, don't shoot prematurely. The March 2022 ambush footage demonstrates this. The Ukrainian hunter-killer team positioned itself in a concealed location, observed the Russian convoy, and exercised disciplined target discrimination, allowing less valuable targets to pass while maintaining communication with other elements. That's not instinct, that's training, and it worked. Successful ambush operations rely on quality reconnaissance and inter-unit coordination to support precise target discrimination. Ukrainian forces combined drones for reconnaissance, infantry teams with anti-tank missiles for strikes, and artillery for follow-up attacks. Drones, often Turkish Bayraktar TB2s, would identify Russian columns. They'd relay coordinates to ground teams. Hunter-killer teams would position themselves along predicted routes. When the column arrived, they'd strike. Multiple teams firing simultaneously from different positions, overwhelming the Russian ability to respond. Artillery would then target the stalled convoy, hitting vehicles trying to escape or regroup. It's combined arms warfare executed by small, decentralized units. Exactly what modern militaries train for, but Ukraine actually implemented it under combat conditions. The results speak for themselves. Throughout 2022 and into 2023, Ukrainian forces destroyed thousands of Russian armored vehicles. Standard operating procedure for ambushed forces is to face the ambush head-on, suppress the enemy with fire, and move to flank the ambushers. But Russian forces often failed to execute. Panic, poor training, lack of unit cohesion, inadequate leadership. Ukrainian forces capitalized. British weapons gave them the tools. British training gave them the tactics. Ukrainian courage executed the plan. NLAW didn't just work in ambushes along roads. It excelled in urban combat. Cities like Mariupol, Bakhmut, Severodonetsk. These became grinding battles where Russian armor tried to support infantry advances through streets and buildings. Urban terrain is a nightmare for tanks. Narrow streets limit maneuverability. Buildings provide cover for defenders. Every corner is a potential ambush site. Tanks can't elevate guns high enough to target upper floors. NLAW was perfect for this environment. Ukrainian infantry teams would position themselves in buildings overlooking streets. They'd wait for Russian tanks or armored vehicles to advance, then fire from above. Top attack mode became even more effective. Firing down onto vehicles from elevated positions meant hitting the weakest armor, roofs and engine decks. Russian forces struggled to counter this. Suppressing an entire building with tank fire is difficult. Infantry support is supposed to clear buildings, but Russian infantry tactics proved inadequate. Ukrainian defenders used British weapons to devastating effect. One soldier with an NLAW could hold a street against multiple Russian vehicles. And because NLAW is fire and forget, defenders could shoot and immediately relocate. Russian forces would target the launch site, but the operator was already gone. This created a cat and mouse game. Russian armor advances, Ukrainian defender fires, tank destroyed or damaged. Russians try to locate and suppress the defender. Defender has already moved to a different position. It's urban warfare at its most lethal. And British weapons enabled Ukrainian forces to fight it effectively. Bakhmut demonstrated this. Months of grinding combat. Russian forces, including Wagner Group mercenaries, tried to advance street by street. Ukrainian defenders held them back with anti-tank weapons, artillery, and sheer determination. British NLAWs were part of that defense. Every Russian tank destroyed was one less vehicle supporting the advance. Every armored personnel carrier hit was one fewer troops reaching the front lines. The cumulative effect? Russian offensives stalled. Advances measured in meters per day. Casualty ratios favoring defenders. Urban warfare typically favors defenders anyway, but Ukrainian forces with British weapons turned cities into graveyards for Russian armor. Let's zoom out. What was the strategic impact of British weapons in Ukrainian hands? First, Russian armored losses. By late 2024, open source intelligence estimated Russia had lost over 4,000 tanks and thousands more armored vehicles. Not all from British weapons, obviously. Ukrainian artillery, drones, mines, and other systems contributed. But anti-tank missiles, including British NLAWs, accounted for a significant portion. Each destroyed tank represents millions of dollars in equipment, trained crews lost, and reduced offensive capability. Russia started the war with approximately 3,500 operational tanks. They've lost more than that. Replacements come from Soviet-era storage, older, less capable vehicles. The qualitative advantage Russia expected never materialized. Ukrainian forces with modern Western anti-tank weapons proved more than capable of destroying Russian armor. Second, operational delays. The stalled 40-mile convoy north of Kyiv in March 2022 became a global symbol of Russian incompetence. But it wasn't just incompetence, it was Ukrainian resistance armed with effective weapons. That delay gave Ukraine time to mobilize reserves, time to receive more weapons, time to organize defenses, time to prepare for the long war. If that convoy had reached Kyiv quickly and established a siege, the war might have ended differently. British weapons helped prevent that scenario. Third, morale. For Ukrainian soldiers, effective weapons boost confidence. Knowing you can destroy any enemy tank with a shoulder-fired missile is psychologically empowering. For Russian soldiers, the opposite. The fear that any building, any tree line, any piece of terrain could hide a Ukrainian team with tank-killing missiles is demoralizing. Russian tank crews began exhibiting hesitance, reduced willingness to advance, increased casualties among armor units, lower morale across the board. Fourth, strategic messaging. Britain's early and comprehensive support for Ukraine sent a signal to other nations. Support Ukraine and do it seriously. The United States followed with massive aid packages. Germany eventually provided Leopard 2 tanks. France supplied artillery and armored vehicles. Poland sent substantial equipment. Britain's leadership helped build the coalition that sustained Ukraine through 3 years of war. And finally, industrial revitalization. In December 2022, Britain signed a £229 million deal with Saab to replenish depleted NLAW stocks, with deliveries from 2024 to 2026. The war exposed how quickly stocks deplete in high-intensity conflict. Britain and allies learned they need larger stockpiles and stronger production capacity. That lesson is driving defense industrial expansion. More jobs, more production lines, more investment in munitions manufacturing. It's a strategic shift back toward preparing for large-scale conflict rather than assuming small-scale interventions are the future. All of this flows from Britain's decision to supply Ukraine early, supply effectively, and supply continuously. Ukraine's use of British weapons provided lessons for militaries worldwide. First, infantry anti-tank weapons matter a lot. Modern tanks are vulnerable to portable missiles. Even the most advanced armor can be defeated by weapons costing 1 to 2% of the tank's price. This rebalances the tank-infantry relationship. For decades, tanks dominated battlefields. Now, well-armed infantry can contest them effectively. Armies worldwide are reconsidering tank doctrine. More emphasis on combined arms, better infantry screening, more attention to urban warfare. Second, training is as important as equipment. Ukraine received thousands of weapons, but without training, they'd have been less effective. Operation Interflex trained over 51,000 Ukrainian troops in tactics, weapons handling, leadership, and battlefield first aid. That training translated into combat effectiveness. Ukrainian soldiers knew how to use NLAWs properly. They understood ambush tactics. They maintained discipline under fire. Equipment without training is wasted. Training without equipment is useless. Both together create lethal capability. Third, decentralized operations work. Hunter-killer teams operating semi-autonomously achieved remarkable results. They didn't need centralized command for every decision. This is mission command, giving subordinates clear objectives and trusting them to execute. It requires training, trust, and cultural acceptance. Western militaries emphasize this, but Ukraine actually implemented it under combat conditions and proved it works. Fourth, logistics and sustainment are critical. NLAW deliveries make up part of the 10,000 anti-tank weapons Britain supplied to Ukraine during the course of the conflict. That's thousands of missiles. Each one fired is one fewer available. Sustaining operations requires continuous resupply. Britain committed to ongoing support, not just initial deliveries. That sustained Ukraine's ability to fight. Militaries worldwide are reconsidering their ammunition stockpiles. 3 years of war in Ukraine consumed more munitions than expected. Future conflicts will likely be similar. Fifth, adaptability matters. Ukrainian forces adapted British tactics to Ukrainian conditions. They improvised ground launchers for air-launched Brimstone missiles. They developed new ambush techniques combining drones and anti-tank teams. That adaptability multiplied effectiveness. Rigid doctrine would have been less successful. And finally, alliances are force multipliers. British weapons alone wouldn't have been enough. But British weapons plus American artillery, plus German tanks, plus French missiles, plus Polish logistics created a comprehensive capability. Ukraine's success demonstrates the value of coalition warfare. No single nation provided everything, but collectively, they provided enough. The war didn't end in 2022, or 2023, or 2024. It's ongoing in 2025, and Britain continues supplying Ukraine. By April 2024, the UK had committed £7.8 billion in military support to Ukraine, with £3 billion in military aid stretching at least until 2030 to 2031. That's sustained commitment, not a one-time donation, but ongoing support for years. What's being supplied now? More ammunition, artillery shells, small arms rounds, explosives. Britain committed a £300 million ammunition order finalized in July 2024. More drones. In January 2025, Britain and Latvia-led drone coalition delivered 30,000 new attack and surveillance drones, with Britain contributing £7.5 million. More advanced systems. Gravehawk air defense system, co-funded by Britain and Denmark, tested in Ukraine in September 2024 with 15 units scheduled for delivery. More training. Operation Interflex extended through at least the end of 2025. Ukrainian soldiers continue learning British tactics and weapons handling. But challenges remain. British stockpiles of critical military capabilities like NLAW and Javelin have been severely reduced. Replenishing these stocks takes time. One challenge was getting a price from suppliers because they themselves had not sourced a supply chain. Production had to be rebuilt. This isn't unique to Britain. Most Western nations depleted stockpiles faster than anticipated. Industrial capacity wasn't sized for high-intensity, long-duration conflict. That's changing. Production is ramping up, but it takes years to rebuild supply chains and expand manufacturing. Meanwhile, Ukraine still needs weapons, and Britain is balancing supporting Ukraine with maintaining its own defense capabilities. It's a difficult balance, but Britain has chosen to prioritize support for Ukraine, recognizing that Ukraine's success contributes to British security. The question is, how long can this be sustained? Politically, British support remains strong across parties. Prime ministers from Conservative to Labour have maintained commitment. Economically, Britain can afford continued support. £3 billion annually is significant but manageable within defense budgets. Militarily, Britain is rebuilding stocks while supplying Ukraine. It's not either or, it's both. And strategically, supporting Ukraine weakens Russia, Britain's primary security threat. Every day Ukraine resists is a day Russia's military degrades further. So the support continues. More weapons, more training, more commitment. Because Britain understands, Ukraine's fight is Europe's fight, and British weapons in Ukrainian hands defend more than just Ukraine. Let's bring it all together. March 2022. A Ukrainian soldier hidden in a tree line fires a British NLAW missile at a Russian tank. Direct hit. Tank destroyed, convoy shattered. That one engagement is a microcosm of Britain's support for Ukraine. Over 12,000 anti-tank weapons supplied, 5,361 NLAW missiles by May 2022, over 51,000 Ukrainian troops trained, £7.8 billion in military support committed. These aren't just statistics, they're capabilities, tools Ukrainian forces use to resist, to fight back, to win battles. NLAW proved devastatingly effective, light enough to carry, deadly enough to destroy any tank, simple enough to use quickly. British training taught Ukrainian soldiers how to employ these weapons effectively. Ambush tactics, hunter-killer teams, urban warfare, discipline under fire. The combination, effective weapons plus effective training, created lethal capability. And it showed. Russian offensives stalled, armored columns destroyed, strategic objectives denied. The 40-mile convoy that should have besieged Kyiv instead retreated. Russian forces that should have captured Ukraine's capital within days instead withdrew within weeks. British weapons didn't win the war alone. American HIMARS, German Leopards, French artillery, Polish logistics all contributed. But Britain was first. First to commit major weapons, first to establish large-scale training, first to lead the coalition. That leadership mattered. It set the standard. It encouraged others to follow. It built the momentum that sustained Ukraine through years of war. Today, the fight continues. Russian forces still occupy Ukrainian territory. The war grinds on, but Ukraine still fights, and British weapons remain part of that fight. Because this isn't just about Ukraine, it's about the principle that aggression should not succeed, that democracies defend each other, that the international order matters. Britain understood that from day one and acted accordingly. With an annual provision of £3 billion in military aid stretching at least until 2030 to 2031, Britain's commitment continues. More weapons, more training, more support, for as long as it takes. That's the partnership that changed the war. British weapons in Ukrainian hands, British training shaping Ukrainian tactics, British commitment sustaining Ukrainian resistance. One soldier, one missile, one ambush, multiplied thousands of times across 3 years of war. That's how Ukraine used British gear to ambush Russian vehicles. And that's how a small island nation helped change the course of Europe's largest war since 1945. If this breakdown opened your eyes to Britain's critical support for Ukraine, hit subscribe. Drop a comment. What surprised you most? The number of weapons supplied? The ambush tactics? The training program? The ongoing commitment? We're diving deep into military equipment, combat tactics, and how modern wars are actually fought. This is how British weapons helped Ukraine fight back. The NLAWs, the training, the partnership. And now you understand the full story.